On April 12th, 2012, I began a new job at the Watertown Regional Medical Center as their new executive chef. Watertown is in Wisconsin. A couple of days after my first day on the job, I gathered everybody up, the cooks, the servers, the dietitians, to tell them what we were going to do. I said, we're going to cook food from scratch. All of it. Pasta, bread, ketchup, mayonnaise, whatever. We're going to grow food on site, like literally on the hospital premises. We're going to grow food here. And we're going to make everything to order. Now, not everyone received this horrifying news with great aplomb. There was folks that had been there a couple of years to a couple of decades who were up in arms. They said, that's insane. You can't make us cook everything from scratch. That's not our job. That's crazy. That's way too much work. But those that had been there for 30 years or more, 40 years or more, you know what they said? They said, yeah, like we used to, right? It's easy to forget that convenience food is a new invention. And when I talk about convenience food, what am I talking about? I'm talking about just add water gravy and powdered mashed potatoes and boil in a bag soup and canned this and that and frozen entrees and so on and so forth. And so that's why those folks that had been there for a long time remembered what it was like when they had to make all the soup from scratch. And they actually had a garden on site back in the early 60s. The Watertown Hospital had this vision, this idea, this mission, that they wanted to invest in the health of the community. They wanted to invest in the health of their employees and their patients. They felt it was their duty, their responsibility, to not serve human beings the worst food on the planet. Pretty radical, right? It was a crazy, crazy notion. They thought if we can cook something from scratch, if we know how to make soup, if we know how to make sauce, if we know how to break down a chicken, we know how to break down a fish, why shouldn't we? Why wouldn't we do that? So, there must be some sort of a reason for all of this terrible food, all of this convenience food that I'm talking about, because necessity is the mother of invention. And doesn't that look delicious? Preformed peas and a lovely coagulated gravy on top of a pureed mash of some sort of pork mush. But let's be realistic. Convenience food solves a problem, or so we think, right? So what about food cost? Certainly, it must cost more to make everything from scratch than to buy convenience products, we think. Well, no, that's actually not true at all, because in our operations with Sustainable Kitchens, we typically reduce food costs by about 12%. And it's not hard to understand why, because we pay a premium for the convenience of not having to cook something, right? So if we're just buying the raw materials, it's a lot cheaper. So, okay, well, that's great. So you reduce the food cost by 12%, but then what about labor? Aren't you going to have more people in the kitchen? Isn't there going to have to be more skilled labor? Aren't you going to have to pay them a little bit more money? Again, no, because folks in the institutions that we work with already make a good living wage, more so than their restaurant and hotel counterparts. And we just simply redistribute the work. And we think about food service as people in a room making food for people in another room. We don't look at it as restaurants versus hotels versus schools versus hospitals, senior homes. Obviously, they're all a little bit different, but really, when you boil it down to just people making food, there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. So, okay, so you're not adding more staff, you're not paying them more money, but certainly it's going to take more time to make all this food from scratch. I was with a client last year, and I was watching a prep cook open up boxes of preformed salmon fillets that were frozen and cryovac. There was about a stack of 10 cases, and he was going through and he was ripping open these packages. And I was watching this, and I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of work. And it's generating a ton of waste, all that plastic, all that cardboard, and all that time, like ripping open these packages. I walked up to him, I said, wouldn't it be easier if we just got fish, like whole salmon, and broke it down ourselves? And his eyes got like saucers, and he was like, that's crazy. I wouldn't have time to do that. That would be way too hard. I said, okay. I had the chef that night order 50 pounds of whole salmon to come in the next day. When it came time for him to bring out his tower of salmon boxes, I set up shop next to him, I pulled out the whole fish, and I said, let's race. So I started to break down salmon. I had 50 pounds of salmon, broken down, deboned, skinned, portioned, seasoned, on trays, ready to cook by the time he was on his third box out of 10. And I said, okay, so does it really take more time? Obviously not. Convenience food does create new problems, however. We just dispelled all of the myths about the problems that they solve, but they also create new ones. Two in particular. One is depressing, horrible, unhealthy food. And the other one, perhaps more detrimentally and more importantly, is depressed, sad, unhealthy cooks. So when we put this food in the hands of these people, it makes them depressed and it makes them produce a depressing product. And meanwhile, those guys are flying to the bank. So horrifying product after horrifying product has created a situation where the idea for that guy that we just saw of cooking from scratch in an institution seems about as appealing as being dragged behind a car, because they're used to the cans now, and they're used to the boxes and the bags. And when I say we're going to break down whole salmon, their brains are disengaged. So there's nothing exciting or appealing about that at all. So now here we come, the Change Food Fest, and hell no, we won't go. We want change, right? But I feel like we're looking at this the wrong way. And I'm going to use Watertown again as a small example, because this isn't a fight. And for 20 years that I've been in the food service industry, I've always looked at it that way. Like, we got to topple the big guys. We got to, hack down this big tree. And I realized after years of doing this that that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. We have wonderful things happening, and we're all doing wonderful things. But we're working in this tiny little corner of a very, very big room, and that big room is controlled by a lot of big cardboard boxes. So what we did at Watertown that essentially eradicated all of those convenience foods is that we created a system where we couldn't use it. So we didn't have to ward off the convenience food anymore. We didn't have to resist the garbage ingredients. We couldn't use it in our operation because we made it obsolete. And I will explain what I mean. It couldn't perform better for us than the food that we grew and sourced ourselves. And when I say perform better, I mean flavor, I mean experience of eating, and most importantly, I mean cost. In our dry storeroom, it wasn't big enough to house big boxes. So the shelves were deliberately designed to be shallow, so we couldn't put a big box of pre-made whatever on it. We couldn't use heat and serve products because everything was made to order, and we had no hot holding. We had no steam table pans. So everything was made in these guys. And we also had no freezer in the kitchen, so we couldn't buy frozen products. And then also, when we grew our food on site, and our GPOs and our broadliners would come and they would say, well, Mr. Johnson, we know that you're doing all this really cool stuff with fresh food and scratch food and all of that, but we have this great new product that we would love to introduce to you, and the price point on it is really good. I'd say, go to hell. We can't use it. We don't want it, and it can't possibly be better than free, because that's what it costs for us to grow the food in the back, outside of the cost of the seeds. So my point, we don't need to break the system. We simply need to make it obsolete. Thank you very much.